What does The Conjuring, Annabelle, the Amityville Horror, and A Haunting in Connecticut all have in common? If your answer is that they are all based on real-life occurrences that were investigated by a self-taught demonologist and a clairvoyant that were married and skyrocketed to fame in the 1970s because they made their living investigating the paranormal, banishing demons, and they even had one of the world's largest collections of haunted objects in a museum, and one of those objects was the one and only, needs no introduction, Annabelle doll, then you would be right. And this is the fascinating story of Ed and Lorraine Warren. Hi, my name is Tasha, and this is my series White Rabbit, where we deep dive into anything spooky, odd, or just interesting while I apply some special effects makeup. Before we go any further, if I'm doing this through a lot of the video, it's because this is itching my forehead. I don't know how people do like bangs. They're so cute, but I don't know how y'all do it because it's agitating. You know my damn nerves. Anyway, I am so excited for today's story because I have done so much true crime lately. It's nice to have a break. I mean, true crime is unfortunately plentiful, but I don't know. It's nice to think about something terrifying in a different way. Which brings us to today's story. I don't know if you know anything about the Warrens, but I'm sure you have at least heard about the movies that are based off of their investigations, Annabelle, all the ones I named in the beginning. Now, whether you believe in spirits, energies, or that these two pulled off one of the greatest hoaxes of all time, I think you should stick around, hear this story out, and drop your comments below. Today's makeup was super scary, but exciting at the same time. I saw this tutorial for a latex, like broken doll mask that I just had to try. I thought it was so cool, and it gave me an opportunity to work on sculpting, which I almost never really do. And I got to use my face cast, so instead of putting makeup on my face for hours and hours and hours, I just got to work on my face cast, and I don't really do that often. So yeah, I enjoyed it. It was great. It was challenging, but in the realm of what I could possibly do, and I can't wait to try to make another one and see how it evolves over time. But yeah, okay, really quickly before we get started, if you would like to see more of me, all you have to do is hit that subscribe button or follow me on my other social media platforms, which I will link below. I'm not a super frequent poster. I don't post all the time, but I have my moments. I have my moments that I shine. So if you want to follow me there, see you there. I'm being weird, I don't know. Okay, let's take it from the top with Ed and Lorraine Warren. Ed Warren Miney was born September 7th, 1926 in Bridgeport, Connecticut. His childhood was pretty normal for a child born in the 1920s. That was until he turned 5, because at the tiny age of 5, Ed started to see some really strange things. It all started one day when Ed was at home living his normal 5-year-old life. I'm sure he was booked and busy, but Ed noticed a little dot of floating light. I envisioned that scene in Finding Nemo where Dory and Marlin, his name, is it Marlin? I think it's Marlin, saw that little floating light when they were in like the depths of the sea. Y'all know what I'm talking about.
I see a light.
Anyway, so Ed saw this little floating light, and then this floating light started to expand and grow and get bigger. And after it was done expanding, Ed could see that this was the face of his landlady that had died about a year before. So terrified little Ed, he runs to his father and he tells his father about what he saw. His father basically brushed it off. He told him there's always a logical explanation for things, that there was no such thing as ghosts. He didn't need to be scared, and he was very adamant that Ed let it go. All this did was make Ed share less with his father about what he was going through, because that was just the beginning. He did not stop having experiences. He just didn't wouldn't tell anybody about them. It was almost as if that first spirit had opened some kind of door and just allowed all these other spirits to come to him. It was like the floodgates were opened. According to Ed, his childhood home was haunted, and either he was the only one that was experiencing things, or his parents also experienced things but they didn't talk about it. Either way, he felt like he was alone in this, like he was the only one. There was one specific spirit that would come to Ed all the time, like almost on a nightly basis, and from what I gather, this wasn't a scary encounter, but the spirit was just always there, and she would tell him things about himself as a man. And she would get really specific. She would say things like, you're going to work really close with priests. You're not going to be a priest, but you're going to aid them and you're going to assist them. You're going to be a big deal. You're really going to matter and make a difference. This woman came to Ed so often that eventually he did end up telling his father about these encounters. And when he was telling his father, he was going into really specific detail about her mannerisms, the way she looked, all these details about her. Ed's father started asking him all these questions about this woman, and he rushed off and went to get a picture, brought it back and showed Ed, asking him, is this the woman that you've been seeing? It was, and come to find out that this was Ed's aunt that had passed away before he was even born. And poor little Ed was so terrified of all of these things that were happening that he wouldn't even be in the house alone. If nobody was home, even if it was pouring raining outside, Ed would sit outside on the front porch and just wait for somebody to come back. He was so scared. I'm gonna get into Ed's teenage years a little bit later. I want to talk about Lorraine first because they actually met so young that their stories start to intertwine really early on. Lorraine was born Lorraine Rita Moran, January 31st, 1927, also in Bridgeport, Connecticut. And just like Ed, there's nothing much to report about her childhood. It was pretty normal, other than the fact that when she was very young, she started to show signs that she might be clairvoyant. From what I understand, someone clairvoyant can perceive things that are beyond just the five senses. So this could be through the use of a Ouija board or through dreams. There's so many different ways that things come to them, but the bottom line is it's something beyond our five senses. It involves having a much deeper level of insight. Lorraine didn't know that this was odd or different until she was about 12 years old. And when she was 12, Lorraine was at school and they planted this sapling tree together with her class. And when the entire class stepped backward to look at the tree in admiration, Lorraine was looking up into the sky. So a nun approached Lorraine and she asked her, what are you looking at? And Lorraine replied, I'm looking at the tree. So the nun was like, are you seeing in the future? And Lorraine was like, I guess so. The nun was having none of that, and she got sent to the mother superior, which I assume is like getting sent to the principal's office. It's like the head nun, I think. I'm not 1000% sure of the credentials there. I'm not too positive. But that was the moment that Lorraine realized that this wasn't exactly normal, the things that she experienced. She also noticed that anytime she would talk about people's auras, because she could see auras, the nuns would get very upset and her family would get very upset. So Lorraine quickly learned that she had to keep those things to herself, and she did. When Lorraine was 16, she developed a little crush on a boy that worked at the movie theater that she used to go to with her mom. Ed was the usher at this movie theater, and he and Lorraine quickly began dating. When Ed turned 17, he joined the Navy. He actually joined the Navy on his 17th birthday, which this was during World War II, so that's scary AF for a 17-year-old. He joined the Navy and they shipped him right on out. After only 4 months of deployment, Ed went through a very traumatic event that ended up shaping his entire life. One winter night in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, the ship that Ed was on had a collision with an oil tanker. It was a massive explosion and everyone was ordered to abandon ship basically. And they had to jump into the middle of the Atlantic Ocean in the middle of winter in the dead of night. That is the scariest thing I have ever heard. They had to jump in this shark-infested water. They had to jump into the shark-infested water and it was freezing cold. And even though Ed was a really good swimmer, as soon as his body touched the water, he basically knew he was in trouble because it was so hard for him to even make himself move. It was like hypothermia was instantly setting in. Because if you didn't know, hypothermia can set in really fast, like within a matter of just a few minutes. Ed was in the water surrounded by flames. He was freezing and he was also helping another soldier to stay afloat because this guy was having like a really hard time and he was basically dying in front of him. So he is not only keeping himself above water, but he's helping to keep someone else above water. Ed started praying this prayer: Holy Mary, Mother of God, please do not let me die here. He was begging and pleading and crying out. And as he was begging and pleading and crying out, there was a little part in the flames. And through that little part came a lifeboat. Lorraine was at home listening to a program called Make Believe Ballroom. It was a radio show, and she was actually writing Ed a letter when they interrupted the program and they broke the news about the ship's collision. Lorraine was devastated because they had a list of survivors. First of all, there were so few survivors. A lot of people died. And the list of survivors that they read off during this news break, they did not say Ed's name. He was not included in the list of survivors. So she was freaking out. Even though they didn't list Ed's name with the list of survivors on this news break, Lorraine and Ed's father basically did not give up until they had confirmation that he was gone. And while they were trying to get this confirmation, they ended up confirming that he was alive. They actually ended up finding him at a marine hospital. Immediately after the incident, Ed was granted survivor's leave, and he and Lorraine used that time to officially tie the knot. They had one daughter a year after they got married, and her name was Judy, and they just tried to settle into being a normal family. Ed was actually a really talented artist. He used to paint these houses and landscapes, and then he would sell them for like $5, which would be today like $80. But he sold enough of these to provide a living for his family. They lived pretty comfortably. There was a notable shift in his artwork because when Ed would be out looking for inspiration and houses that he wanted to paint, he found himself being drawn to older, creepy, spooky looking houses. So Ed and Lorraine decided to turn this into a cute little couple activity, cute little creepy couple activity. Ed would search for houses that were reported to be haunted, and he and Lorraine would go travel to that state, speak with the homeowners, get the backstory about the house, and Ed would try to capture the essence of this spooky house in his painting. Because Ed and Lorraine would spend so much time speaking with the homeowners and getting to know the history, his art had such an edge because every single piece of art came with such an interesting backstory, and it just made people want to buy it even more. Ed and Lorraine traveled all across the United States, and they did this for about 5 years. During this time, while Ed was speaking with all of these different families about what was going on their property, he started to notice a lot of similarities between what they were experiencing and what he experienced as a child. In the beginning, Lorraine was really skeptical about any stories that involved ghosts or spirits because she had only seen auras or visions. She had never experienced what would really be considered a true haunting. So in her mind, she felt like maybe these people were being a little dramatic, or maybe they had a really big imagination. She just wasn't fully buying into it. The thing that started to change her mind was that these people from all different walks of life, all over the United States, started to present very distinct patterns. There were some similarities between all of these cases that she couldn't ignore. Ed started pouring himself into research on demonology. He wanted to know about entities, spirits, how they behaved, the difference between them, how you could interact with them, how you can stop them. He was hooked, and the Warrens became very popular and very highly requested. They were the experts at the time. People started calling on them to banish ghosts and close portals. There were ghosts everywhere in the 40s, I guess, because Ed and Lorraine were booked and busy. And they never charged for coming out to investigate a haunted house. They wrote books and they were hired to come give lectures, and that was the base of their income at the times. When they would come and banish these ghosts, close these portals, that was like all free. In 1952, the Warrens founded the New England Society for Psychic Research. And this is where they really amped up the paranormal investigation. They started to really invest money into research and the newest tools and gadgets. They also started to collect a pretty good amount of haunted or possessed items from these different homes that they would go visit. After accumulating so many of these objects, they decided to open up their very own occult museum. And at one point, it was like the largest in the world. One of the most famous items in this occult museum is the infamous Annabelle doll. I'm going to talk about 3 of the Warrens' most famous cases. They all have movies loosely based on them. And I say loosely because we all know that Hollywood adds a lot of fluff to stories to make them good movies. So I'm going to tell you the true story according to not only the Warrens, but also several families that experienced these things. With that being said, let's talk about Annabelle. In 1970, a nursing student named Donna received a Raggedy Ann doll for her birthday from her mother. Raggedy Ann was a really popular rag doll in the 1920s, so by the 1970s, it was kind of vintage and cool. So her mom found one for her and got it for her as a birthday gift. She had it sent over to the apartment that she shared with her roommate, Angie. So Donna and Angie, roommates. It wasn't long before the roommates started noticing some really strange things that were happening with the doll. It started out very slight, like the doll would just be in different positions. Maybe its head would be facing a different way than they left it, or an arm or leg would be repositioned. Already sounds like a nightmare to me. Over time, these movements became bigger. There would be times where Annabelle would be in a completely different room when neither Donna nor Angie had moved the doll. The girls even claimed that sometimes Annabelle would be in a different room standing up on her own. And if you think that's bad, it gets worse. Donna and Angie started finding these little like handwritten notes in childish handwriting that would say either help us or help Lou. And it was written on this parchment paper that neither of them had. There was no parchment paper like that in the entire house. So that was really scary. But the final scary, like final boss scary moment, the scariest moment, Donna ended up finding tiny drops of blood on Annabelle's chest and on her hands. The girls panicked. They didn't know what to do. I wonder if they thought of just like getting rid of the doll, because to me, that would be the very first thing I would do, but I didn't see that happened anywhere. Anyway, they ended up getting in contact with a medium who agreed to come over and host a seance. During the seance, the medium got into contact with a spirit of a young girl named Annabelle Higgins. So that's where the name Annabelle came from. I know I said it earlier and I didn't quite say where it came from yet, but yes, this is where they got the name Annabelle from. Annabelle had lived on the land where the apartment complex was built, and she ended up losing her life at a very young age. This spirit felt really comfortable with Donna and Angie, so that's why it was always around. It just wanted to stay. Annabelle felt a connection to those two, and she just wanted to be loved. She was just a little girl wanting to live in a doll and be loved by 2 older girls. So Donna and Angie decided that they would let the spirit just stay in the doll, which was the worst possible decision that they could have made. One of Donna's friends named Lou was really afraid of Annabelle from the very beginning. Like from the moment they brought the doll home, he was like really uneasy around it. He just felt like something was off, and he was soon proved right. One night when Lou was over, it got really late, so he just decided to stay the night. Now, according to Lou, he woke up in the middle of the night, basically paralyzed. He could not move. He looked down at the foot of the couch, I think, where he was sleeping. It was either the foot of the bed or the foot of the couch. But he looked down to the foot of the bed or couch, and he saw Annabelle just standing there looking at him. Unable to move, the doll started to climb up his legs and straddled him. Lou was so scared that he passed the hell out. When he regained consciousness, he was so confused and was questioning, like, did that really happen? It felt really real, but did I make that up? He was confused and scared. And then there was another time. I know, another time. There would never be another time with me. Annabelle would not have the chance to straddle me twice. One day, Lou and Angie were in the apartment and they were planning a trip. And there was this strange, gurgling, weird sound coming from Donna's room. The sounds were strange enough that Lou got really worried. So he went into Donna's room to see if everything was okay. But once he got in the room, there was nothing out of place. There was no one in the room except for Annabelle. She was tossed into the corner like she had been launched across the room. So Lou walks over to Annabelle and picks her up to turn her around and just like look at the doll, when suddenly he feels this searing, burning pain all across his chest. And when Lou looked down, he saw these deep scratch marks that covered his entire torso. The wounds were deep and painful, and the scariest thing about it was just 2 days after he got these injuries, they completely vanished off of his body. So by this point, Donna and Angie are terrified because when they agreed to let the little child spirit stay inside Annabelle, they didn't know she was a child psycho. This is when they decided to reach out to the Warrens for help. The Warrens quickly concluded that this was not the spirit of some little girl that died tragically. Instead, they believed the doll was possessed by an inhuman spirit that had manipulated the roommates into letting them stay. The Warrens explained to the roommates that spirits do not attach themselves to objects like dolls, but inhuman spirits or entities or demons can and will attach themselves to objects. They also told the roommates that this doll was just a conduit and that the real ultimate goal was to possess one of them. The Warrens told the roommates that because of the way things were escalating, especially with Lou, that it was obvious that the entity was growing stronger. The Warrens ended up performing a series of exorcisms in the girls' apartment, and afterward they took the Annabelle doll home with them. The Warrens claimed that while they were on their way home with Annabelle, their brakes failed several times, almost causing them to get into some really severe accidents, and it did not stop until they sprinkled holy water over the doll. The Annabelle doll was moved into the Warren Occult Museum in Monroe, Connecticut, where it was displayed in a specially designed glass case with a sign that said, "Positively do not open." Over the years, many visitors that came to the museum claimed to have a feeling of unease or queasiness whenever they were around the doll. One infamous incident at the museum happened when a visitor came and apparently was like mocking Annabelle, and he was hitting the case and daring the doll to do something. I don't know, it was really weird, but that visitor, when he left, got into a really bad motorcycle accident and he died. Now, correlation doesn't mean causation, so obviously this could just be a coincidence, but it did really help to fuel the rumors and the mystery around the Annabelle doll. It was just like a hell of a coincidence. The next famous case we are going to talk about is about the DeFeo family murders. In the early morning hours of November 13th in 1974, Ronald DeFeo Jr., the oldest son of the DeFeo family, walked into a local bar in Amityville.
I can't say that word.
Amityville. and he told everyone that his entire family had been killed. The police were called and they rushed over to the family's house where they found all 6 members of the family shot dead. There was Ronald Sr. and Louise, which were the parents, and then their 4 children, Dawn, Allison, Mark, and Matthew. All of them had been shot to death in their beds with no sign of a struggle. All 6 victims were found lying face down, all shot to death with a .35 caliber rifle. And despite this being a very loud gunshot blast, none of the neighbors reported to have heard anything happen, and none of the victims appeared to have woken up before they were killed. Ronald DeFeo Jr. initially claimed to have just found his family dead, but it didn't take too long for him to actually confess to all 6 of the murders. During the trial, his defense attorney tried to say that he was essentially innocent because he was insane and he kept hearing all of these voices telling him to commit these murders. DeFeo was found guilty of 6 counts of second-degree murder and he was sentenced to life in prison. 13 months after the murders, another family purchased the house. This was the Lutz family, which consisted of George and Kathy Lutz and their 3 children. Well, they were Kathy's children from her previous marriage. But they all moved into the house at 112 Ocean Avenue. The family knew about the gruesome murders that took place in the house, but they just felt like this was the perfect house for them, and they got it for a steal because honestly, nobody was checking for this house. But shortly after moving in, the Lutzes started to experience some really strange activities in the house. George Lutz, the father, apparently felt a really strong connection to Ronald DeFeo Jr. He started waking up at 3:15 a.m. every single morning, and that was the exact time that Ronald DeFeo Jr. had slaughtered his family. Well, began to slaughter his family. George was normally a very calm, even-tempered, relaxed man, but he started to show really erratic behavior. He would do things like stoke the fireplace for hours and hours on end, claiming that it was freezing, but none of the other family members felt any cold. The entire family reported smelling terrible, rotten, putrid smells in the house. These odors would come and go, and they were never able to be explained. Despite the cold weather, there would be massive swarms of flies that would collect in certain areas in the house, specifically the sewing room. The flies loved the sewing room. The family reported a green gelatinous slime that would ooze from the walls at times, which, what? Doors would slam on their own, doors would open on their own. There were also several cold spots in the house that no matter what they did, those specific spots were never able to be warmed. Kathy Lutz said that she was physically attacked by something that she could not see. She also reported seeing visions of some demonic entity with red glowing eyes. And the scarier part about that is that her daughter Jody reported having an imaginary friend, which was some pig-like creature that had red glowing eyes. And to top it all off, several members of the family reported that they had woken up to find themselves being thrown or just launched across the room. Word began to spread about what was going on in the Lutz's home, and I don't know who reached out to who, but eventually the Warrens did end up coming out to investigate. During the investigation, Lorraine Warren reported feeling a sensation of overwhelming dread in the house. She also couldn't let go of the feeling that there was some demonic presence and that the house had had some type of influence over the murders that had happened there. Ed Warren had even captured a famous picture of a boy glaring down from a stairwell with glowing eyes, even though supposedly at that time there was no one in the house. The Warrens claimed that this home was a hotbed of paranormal activity, and part of that they claimed was due to the fact that this house was built on native land. And not only that, but they believed that this specific house was used to conduct some type of ritual or rituals. There was a room inside the basement of this house that, according to all documents about this house, didn't exist, except it did. And inside of this room, they found a lot of ritualistic stuff, basically. It appeared that this room had been used to dabble in a little bit of black magic. And the Lutzes had a family dog that was terrified of this room. The dog would go nowhere near it. The Warrens did everything they can for the Lutz family inside this house, but to be perfectly honest, even they were a little bit freaked out by the house, so they called upon the Catholic Church to come out and do blessings. The church performed blessings and exorcisms at the request of the Warrens, but even with all of that, the Lutz family only lasted 28 days before they fled. They didn't even take their belongings. They just did not want to go back into the house. In case you haven't guessed it yet, this story was the inspiration for the Amityville Horror. The last case that we're going to talk about was actually the inspiration for the movie The Conjuring. Well, the whole series, basically. The whole series of movies. The true story of The Conjuring centers around the haunting of the Perron family in the 1970s. In January of 1971, Roger and Carolyn Perron, along with their 5 daughters, moved into this massive 14-bedroom farmhouse. This farmhouse was located in Harrisville, Rhode Island, and it was known as the Old Arnold Estate, built in 1736. This huge farmhouse sat on 200 acres of land. This property was massive. Almost immediately after moving in, the family began to experience strange occurrences. And when I say almost immediately, I mean before they had even unpacked their bags. It started innocent enough. Doors would open and close by themselves. Things might go missing. There were several cold spots in the house, but it did not take long for these small things to start to escalate. Over time, the parents began to experience full body apparitions. Most of these were friendly or just hanging around. The oldest daughter, Andrea, explained that she saw several different ghostly figures that often roamed the halls of the house. There was an old man in this very old-fashioned uniform. There would be children running and playing through the house. There was even the spirit of an old woman that would tuck the children in at night. Definitely creepy, but the spirits didn't seem to have any ill intentions. Unfortunately for the Perron family, all of the spirits weren't friendly. The family began to hear loud noises, banging, the dragging of furniture, voices late at night. The Perron daughters reported seeing shadowy figures that would roam through the house at night, and they even said that they were physically attacked. The Perrons had a daughter named Cindy, and Cindy in particular would wake up claiming to have had hands clawing and pulling at her, grabbing her hair. There were even times where the other children would hear a loud thump in the middle of the night, and they would wake up to find Cindy clear across the room, and she would claim to have been thrown from her bed. Carolyn, the mother, felt as if some dark force had attached itself to her and was slowly draining all of her energy and all of her life. The final straw for Carolyn was when she saw the apparition of an old woman with a distorted voice and face, in her face, screaming for her to get out. And I know Carolyn wanted to get the hell out, but they couldn't afford to get out because they had just bought this home. All of their money went into this home. They didn't feel like they could just uproot their family and move again. As a part of a last-ditch effort to stay in the house, the family called Ed and Lorraine Warren. Lorraine Warren immediately felt a dark presence in the house. She felt several spirits, but the most dangerous and most dark force that she felt was of Bathsheba Sherman. According to local lore, Bathsheba Sherman was an old woman who used to live on the property in the early 1800s. She was rumored to have been involved in witchcraft, and she was even accused of sacrificing a child. These charges were never proven in court, but Bathsheba was devastated by what she was accused of and by how people treated her. Bathsheba was found hanging on her property, but not before she cursed the land and anybody that would ever live on it. Lorraine believed that Bathsheba's spirit had latched onto Carolyn because it was a jealous little shit, basically, and it wanted Carolyn out of the house or it wanted to possess her. This became very obvious when Carolyn started to show clear signs of possession, such as random violent outbursts, speaking in different languages in an unknown voice. Her whole personality changed, and honestly, the children were pretty afraid of her. Carolyn's health started to deteriorate, and she reported more and more terrifying encounters with the spirit of Bathsheba. There was this one incident where Carolyn was laying in bed and she felt this stabbing pain in her leg. It felt like somebody took a needle and just jabbed it through her leg. When she was looking at the area, Carolyn found this tiny little puncture mark, like from a sewing needle. So this really tied into the legend of Bathsheba, because apparently the child that she had sacrificed, she did so by stabbing it with sewing needles. There were other instances where Carolyn would suddenly go mute, or she would start speaking in tongues or acting very aggressive. She was just going through a lot at the time. Ed and Lorraine conducted several exorcism-like rituals on this house to try to rid the house of the spirit of Bathsheba, but unfortunately, they were never able to do so. Bathsheba was like, this is my house. I see your spells and your holy water, but that's not gonna work over here. Lorraine talks about this house as if it's like the most terrifying experience she's ever had. There are several interviews that you can watch of Ed and Lorraine talking about this house and their experience with this house. And Lorraine specifically seems to have a little bit of trauma involving this specific haunt. One of the scariest moments in this house happened during a seance. Ed and Lorraine were holding a seance, and according to them and everyone else in the room, Carolyn was lifted from the floor and hurled across the room in front of everyone. Andrea, one of the daughters, was present during the seance, and she stated that this was the most terrifying moment of her life, and it was as if her mother was possessed by something. Ed and Lorraine Warren strongly advised the Perron family to leave the house. They had tried everything they knew, and they still could not rid the house of this spirit. And it had gotten to the point where Lorraine was really afraid to be in the house. Like, she didn't even want to try to get rid of the spirits anymore. However, due to the financial position that they were in, the family wasn't able to leave the house until 1980. Andrea Perron later wrote 3 books. It was a trilogy about her experiences in that house. And she has said that the way The Conjuring depicts the events doesn't even scratch the surface on what that family really experienced. And that's crazy, because The Conjuring was scary. Ed and Lorraine Warren are probably the most famous paranormal investigators in history. But for every person that believes that they were out here doing the Lord's work, there's a person that believes that this couple got away with one of the biggest hoaxes of all time. One of the most significant criticisms against the Warrens is that through all of their investigations, they have never provided one single iota of scientific proof of any of these paranormal events. They were involved in dozens of high-profile cases, but they have never been able to produce one credible photograph, video recording, any kind of scientific evidence that is accepted by the scientific community as proof of paranormal activity. And this isn't to say that there weren't recordings or videos or photographs, but they weren't accepted as scientific proof by the scientific community. In their investigations, the Warrens mostly relied on spiritual rituals, psychic visions, and seances. And obviously, this is not something that you can prove unless you're the one to experience it. Even when people came forward to say, yes, I was there, yes, this really happened, it still wasn't accepted because people are susceptible to confirmation bias, and also people were accusing the Warrens of manipulating a lot of these families. One example of this supposed manipulation is the Perron family and Bathsheba. It is written nowhere that any of this happened. To me, this isn't really a solid argument because I don't know that the record keeping in the early 1800s was like super solid. I feel like there are probably several things that happened in the early 1800s that there is no record of. Or there are things that there was a record of, but they were destroyed or caught fire. I don't know. They were somehow lost. What I'm saying is just because we don't have a record of it doesn't mean that it didn't happen. But also, because there is no record of it, we can't really prove that it did. In the case of the Amityville house, the lawyer of Ronald DeFeo Jr., a couple years after the Lutz family had moved, he basically came out and said that they all got together and fabricated this story for a book. I don't know because he's the only one who ever said it, but he did put it out there. I mean, it's definitely possible, but the only thing that's confusing about that to me is that the Warrens wrote several books. They didn't need him to get a book deal. Like, why would they cut him on the deal anyway? But this is what he claimed, and it's definitely possible. In the case of Annabelle the doll, initially the reports basically described the doll as being possessed by this mischievous spirit. There were only very small things that the doll did, like moving or slightly shifting positions. But as the story gained attention, all of a sudden this small mischievous spirit became this huge demonic possession. It was like over time the story just got larger and scarier when it started out very small. Key witnesses sometimes recanted their story, and sometimes people came forward and admitted that the Warrens had far exaggerated their story. Even within the paranormal community, the Warrens were pretty controversial. Many serious paranormal investigators felt like the Warrens relied too heavily on spiritual practices, such as exorcisms and clairvoyance, whereas other experts would go in with a certain level of openness, I guess you could say. The Warrens would go in pretty much with an assumption that they were dealing with demonic forces. So some people felt like they weren't being objective, like they were going in just wanting to prove their preconceived notions. Of course, we can't say if that is or isn't true, but that's just the feeling. Ed Warren passed away in 2006, and he was followed by Lorraine in 2019. Their museum closed in either 2018 or 2019. I believe it was due to zoning reasons. Like, all of this time they were operating this museum in a private home, and the city finally was like, nah, no more. After all of the research that I did, I have no idea if Ed and Lorraine Warren were the real deal. I definitely believe in spirits and energies, and I have had experiences that I would consider to be paranormal, but I also believe that once the Warrens started getting all of this attention and all of this money, that they did start to exaggerate. I feel like they were definitely riding the wave of fame, but when I think about them traveling the states and staying in all of these haunted places, I would find it hard to believe that they didn't have any experiences. But we'll never really know what was real and what was fake, because with paranormal activity, nothing can be proven. Drop your thoughts in the comment section below. Do you believe this was the real deal, or do you think that this was a hoax? If you made it to the end of this video, leave me some ghost emojis in the comment section. Don't forget to follow for more content just like this, and I will see you down another rabbit hole.